Welcome, everybody, to the Thrivestry Podcast, where we talk about creating change in our lives and in the world around us. I'm your host, Jeremy Jones. This is my co-host, Gigi. Say hi, Gigi.
Hi.
And today we're going to go over, it's going to be a little bit different. We're going to go over some more strength-focused concepts. You know, this podcast is coming out when we go through some of our, we're starting a new six-week rhythm. And then we're going to break down an article where this person has a slightly different theory about why the interference effect exists. And the interference effect is that research has shown that when doing aerobic work and trying to make strength and hypertrophy muscle size gains, they interfere with each other. And so that aerobic work has been shown to prevent strength gains. And so, you know, this is really important for us as strength and conditioning coaches. You know, those two words are basically what they're talking about. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. So we're going to start off with the programming stuff. If you guys know all this stuff, you can fast forward. But I'm going to put on my thinking cap, and so you guys. So I'm ready. So I'm ready to throw down the stuff. I'm just kidding.
Where did you get that hat? That is so ridiculous.
Las Vegas.
Obviously.
My son Jack saw people walking around with masks that had like light up features on the face, and so they have these different like monsters or just electronics and stuff. And so we went on a wild goose chase to find it on like our last day, because he was like, I want that. And so we found this little shop, and then it was like you could get 2 for a discount, 2 items. And so then we tried to decide what hat to get, and we both just thought it was funny. So this is Jack's and my hat. There's another one that was like recharging or something too, but I just thought it was funny because it was a total dad joke with a thinking cap. So as most of you guys know, we do a 6-week strength focus, and that involves where we have one lift that has been planned out far in advance, and we usually test on week 5 or so the week before, and then when we start, we're going to start with lighter percentages, but it's not exactly percentage lifting. And we're going to talk about how to add weight today, and like what, you know, when you're doing the strength focus, what, you know, when do you add weight, when do you stay the same throughout the focus. But just as a reminder, for the first 2 weeks, we're keeping it pretty light, and then, you know, work more on form and correct some of those issues. Then there's kind of a blend of Metcon duration and volume, and then how heavy the lifts get. And of course they get heavier toward the end. And we're doing a little bit more frequently lifting throughout the week, doing other lifts. And we're not doing the same lift all week. We alternate it with other lifting too. So it's not a pure strength focus or strength or you know, strength cycles is what people call it. And in the first 2 weeks, the weeks 1 and 2, we always increase the Metcon, right? Because we're lifting much lighter loads in general. It allows me to put a little bit more volume and duration into the Metcons. And so, you know, if you like the longer Metcons, the first 2 weeks are probably your favorite time of the cycle. And if you like more lifting, the last 2 weeks tend to be the favorite. And so just keep that in mind as we talk about this stuff. But mainly what I want to talk about today is this sort of increase in intensity and frequency that we see in the 6-week focus. So I'm going to share a different graphic here, and we've got a little flow chart. So the way the strength focus, the lifting sessions are planned is they're usually planned with something like, you might see 2s for 7 sets, and then I'm going to make it really easy, 2s, 3s, and 4s. Let's just say that, and we might do it 12 times. So we would go through that. That sort of pattern. Usually I might do a 4th thing that might be a component of the lift or a similar lift. Like when we were doing cleans, we did clean pulls as the 4th lift. But essentially what's going on is we're adding volume, right? So you'll pick your starting load. It's usually recommended, has a recommended percentage. And that percentages aren't the best for this style of training, because unless you know exactly what your max is and you're a pretty advanced lifter, those percentages aren't very accurate. So we're not going to give exact percentages. I like to give a range, and because a lot of that stuff depends on technique and like I said, your training age, if you will. So it's usually, let's say, 70 to 80%. In that first week or two, you might have to jump around a little bit. You might have started too light. You might, when you do the next session, it might be feel like you started too heavy if you started too heavy. And so it's okay to make some adjustments in that first week or two to outside of this sort of pattern. But you can see that if we did 2s and then 3s and then 4s, we're adding volume, we're adding more sets. So if you did 2s for 7 sets and the next one's 3s, but you only do it for 6 sets. And so now we're at 18 total reps. And then we do 4s for 5 sets, which would be 20 total reps. Now you would do the same weight for all of those, and then you would add weight when we went back to 2s again, right? And then you continue to go that way. So this is a style of programming that makes sure that every session we're either adding reps to the set or we're adding load and going back down again. But there's always there's always this sort of question like, what weight should I be lifting today? It says this percentage, but I missed the last one. And this is really one of the more key points of the strength focus and strength cycles is that it's designed so that if people only come and they're hit or miss, they're still making progress, right? So they're still progressing, even if they missed a whole week, right? So the problem with a lot of the more focused strength programs is it's expected that the person doing it is going to do every single session, right? And so if you had customized programming and somebody assigned you, you're going to do this lift 3 times per week, and here's your percentages, and here's your, or here's your exact loads even, you can't just skip one day and then jump in later on, right? That messes up the whole program. You do that, 2 or 3 times in a 6-week program, that program's going to be a lot less effective. And so by having it set up this way with this pattern and this rep scheme, it allows people to maybe only come and do the lift once a week. And then after 6 weeks, they're still going to see some progress, or maybe they did 2 lifts one week and they missed a week and they do 2 lifts the next week and sort of that sort of pattern. They're still going to see some results, especially the beginner and intermediate people. The advanced people need to be a little bit more consistent over that time. If there's 12 sessions scheduled, they should try to hit all of them if they can. And that's why we put out those calendars. But for those of you guys listening to the podcast versus watching the video, you might want to check out the video just to sort of see this. I'll make sure I link to this graphic here too as well. But the question is, how many reps per set today compared to my last session? So if you were to come in and you did let's just say it's something like squats. I squatted last week and I did 3s, right? I did 3s last week at 150 pounds. Okay, great. So today's session, even if it's been a few days or a week or whatever, we're doing squats again, part of the strength focus. So then you have to say, okay, is the session today more reps, the same reps, or less reps? If it's more reps, so if it was 3s last time, even if you missed a week or whatever, and today it's 5s, you would try to do the 5s at the same load, right? And this is one of the reasons why we start so light at the beginning of the cycle in that sort of 70 to 80% range, because that way, if you do miss a whole week, you can still add a little bit of weight. Now, the percentages might be a lot higher, but if you missed a whole week, you might just add 10 pounds, or if we're going to add 10 pounds. So let's go back to the staying at the same load. So again, you're still advancing. You're doing the same load for more reps. And again, now, presumably you did that squat session last week, and you are now a little bit stronger. And we want to continue to teach the body what we want it to do, and that's get stronger and bigger muscles. So that's why we stay at the same. We stay at the previous load. Now, if the weight is if it's the same, let's say you missed a couple in a row or whatever, then you have the option to add a little bit of weight. And you'll notice I made a small note here that says smaller jump. So like if you missed an entire week or more and you did squats 2 weeks ago and you missed all the squat sessions and now it's back to 3s again, you should make it a little bit of a jump, but it should probably, instead of being 10 or 20 pounds like on a squat, you might only go 5 or 10 pounds. So especially you can do a bigger jump if it's earlier in the cycle, but if it's getting close to your max, you'll probably want to make a smaller jump. Just because you haven't had those other sessions in between to help, again, provide that stimulus to get stronger. Now, if the rep scheme is less, if let's say it's 3s, you did 3s a week ago or whatever, and then today it's 2s, that's when you're going to make the bigger jump. So remember that pattern, 3s, 4, or 2s, 3s, 4s that I used as an example. You just did 4s with that weight. Let's say it was 150 pounds. Now you come back and now it's back to 2s or even 3s. Now you can make a little bit bigger jump, because if you can do 4 with 150, then if you can do 4 with 150, you should be able to do 165 with 2s, right? Or 160 with 2s. So you can make a larger jump when we're going down in reps, right? The bigger the gap in reps, the bigger jump you can make. But just keep in mind that over that strength cycle, we're gonna make at least 3, sometimes 4 jumps over a period of a whole cycle. So if you were to add 10 pounds to your squat or whatever, you're adding 40 pounds from where you started. And then usually we're ending with extra volume too. So you might be doing 40 pounds more than you started, but now you're doing it for 5s or whatever. So just be conservative when you're making those weight jumps. So does that make sense?
Yes.
Sorry.
I don't know if you were asking rhetorically or actually asking.
I was actually asking you. I just realized I just talked for like 10 minutes straight. And
We've been friends for a long time. It's not your first time.
Hey.
You know what? I have a funny story. While you're not talking for a second, last week we were on the phone, and my phone, somebody called on the other line, and I had to go get it on the other line. And I was like, I have to just hang on. And you kept talking. And then I was like, whatever. So I went to the other line, talked for a minute or two to my mom, came back, and you were still talking, and you didn't miss a beat, and you didn't even know that I had left.
You are a terrible human and friend.
I was going to tell you then, but I was like, I'll save it for the podcast.
Okay, well, that makes sense then. Okay, that's good. It was a good idea. I can support that. Yeah. So again, this is some of the reasons why the strength focus is the way it is because these other strength programs, like I said, you have to do every session, otherwise you're really limiting the effectiveness of the program. And we want to have this sort of group programming, but we still want people to get results. And that's one of the analogies I make with programming is you can have a super fancy, really detailed, customized program, but that's going to be expensive, and it's also not going to be very durable or resistant to like life interruptions or anything like that. That's like having a really fancy race car. Where the regular daily gym programming needs to be able to adapt and work for a large number of people and with different goals, and also be able to handle interruptions. Like I said, you miss the session or you miss a week of training for whatever reason. It still needs to continue to have some sort of goal. One of the reasons why this more general CrossFit programming works, where they don't have any sort of plan, where it's just, we're going to do a lift once or twice a week, and then we're going to do, Metcons the rest of the time, and just make sure we don't do too many of any one movement. That does actually work. That's kind of what CrossFit does. And it works because if you miss a week or two, you can still jump right back into it. You don't have to go back and make up all the stuff that you missed. But that is the power of the high intensity training that we get out of it. But there is a better way, and that is to have some progressions and some planning that is I don't know what the word is, durable enough or just planned well enough so that, again, people with life interruptions, this is what we all deal with, doesn't totally ruin the last 4 or 5 weeks of training.
Makes sense. So let me ask you something then. Is there anything else you want to say about this, or can I ask my question?
Ask your question.
So my question is, do you ever program the Metcons, these longer Metcons at the end of the beginning of a strength cycle before your strength training stuff?
No.
Why not?
And it's funny because I've heard this come up in some of the gym owner forums and people programming, and they'll talk about, oh, and we had people PR their whatever after doing this 20-minute Metcon, and isn't that great? And you should mix it up, constantly varied, and all this stuff. And that blows my mind that people would do that. Now, in a competition, when you're really sort of competing and trying to compare people to see who's the best, that's not a bad test. Obviously the people who have a good engine and are strong and have good recovery are going to perform better at that test. But from a training standpoint, the biggest problem I see with that is it's dangerous, right? It's just dangerous to put people into, get them tired and fatigued and then put them into some heavy lifting. Now, the other reason why is that it's not as effective for getting people stronger. And that ties into our interference article that we're going to talk about next. Such a good segue. Nailed it.
Thanks. So is there ever a benefit for testing someone like that? Like I can think of a couple different reasons why you would want someone to be able to max out, like train in a way where they're trained to kind of max out after an endurance thing. Like if I think about a firefighter, right, and what they physically go through, or if I think about like an NHL player, and I know like some of our clients over at Mad Lab train NFL players, and one of the things that they really focus on is being able to be focused and have this like high output even after they've been like exhausted in all different manners. But I think that and we're going to get into it when we talk about this article, but there's a difference between being able to train to perform on a test day and training to improve. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And so I what I feel like is, I mean, the other thing to tangent back to the programming a little bit is the way I write the programming is, the warm up and then some activation or mobility, skill. And then if there's a lift that day, then the lift, and then the Metcon's kind of the dessert. Right. And that's because that's priorities, right? We want to put some priorities on. Obviously you have to warm people up. That's just better for folks. But then putting the mobility, for example, earlier on, make sure that there's time for it, right? Instead of waiting for the end and running out of time or people cutting out early. And same thing with the skill work. You're going to learn complex movements and be able to focus on the skill a lot better if you're not totally trashed from doing heavy lifting and or a Metcon. And so we do those things early on, and it functions as part of the warm up, right? So we're continuing to warm up for, the rest of the work that day. And then we want to make sure that people eat their vegetables, which would be the lift, which most, some people learn to love and they love their lifting, but I still feel like a lot of folks prefer the endorphin rush they get from the Metcon a lot more than just doing, heavy squats or whatever. So from a training standpoint, let's say you did that. Let's say you always put a lift after a Metcon, and then you had the other cohort of people, they actually did the lift before the Metcon. They're going to get stronger and still improve on their other measures of fitness faster than people who did the Metcon first, right? Because what we know is that if you try to lift heavy, you're not going to get the same stimulus, and you're going to have this interference effect. And so, as a test, or if somebody has to do it for a job, it's better to train lift first, Metcon after, and then every once in a while maybe change it up. But don't make the lift any kind of really max effort, and try to keep it to lifts that are low risk of injury. So I wouldn't be doing any Olympic lifting, maybe power cleans, but even heavy deadlifts could be pretty sketchy. But doing some squats or doing some push presses or something like that, those I think would be on the kind of more on the safe side than doing some like a snatch or something after being so fatigued. And that's what makes them a good test, right? But again, it's not good for general training and continuing to help people make progress.
Yeah, like the reasons why athletes get paid so much is because they're literally risking their lives for our entertainment. And if you're not getting paid millions of dollars to throw a snatch over your head when you're exhausted, probably don't do it.
Yeah, exactly. And there's this phrase that Greg Glassman always used in the early days, and that's "men will die for points." And really, all that is it's just another way of explaining gamification, right? Creating a game out of it. And so, having the workouts being measured like we do regularly, if 99% of the time it's usually some sort of measurement. It's less about people competing with each other, because then they always push themselves too hard, and it's more about just having some sort of data that you can refer back to later on, right? And so, in the programming, we repeat. Usually, we'll do one or two sort of what I call benchmarks, which could be classic benchmarks or my own benchmarks, and those are workouts that come up every 3 to 6 months or once a year. Then we'll do, usually 2 to 3 repeat workouts. So workouts that I've programmed in the past, could have shown up 6 months ago, could be 2 years ago. But then I'll repeat one of those workouts. And then there's usually 2 to 3 new workouts, so workouts that have never been done before. And so that way you have the benchmark ones. And then you, like I said, you usually have about 3 of the, of repeat workouts. And so, because people are always more motivated by seeing how much farther they've come. And so by being consistent with their training, that comes up again. They're like, oh, I did this workout, and they can remember it, especially if you're using an app like Beyond the Whiteboard. So it's really important, I think, to have that data point, but it's not about the competition side. And it's amazing when people are like, they're pushing themselves toward injury or risking injury. And it's like, you're not getting paid $1 million. Like, there's no money on the line here. This why are you pushing yourself so hard? you know? And so I think that is the drawback to that style of training. And I think it does, the gamification does help people be more consistent. It does help people kind of push into a higher intensity zone because they're competing with their friends or whatever. But ultimately, it's always just, you're only competing with your old self. You know, you're only just trying to be better than you were yesterday. Better than yesterday.
Oh, that sounds like something that it would be cool to have on a tattoo.
Yeah, or something like that. So one day, you guys, I'll show you my better than yesterday tattoo. You have to wait and see. Or you can just scour the internet for shirtless pictures of me.
That's so creepy. What's the article?
So this guy, Chris Beardsley, this is the first time I've ever heard about him, and now I follow him on Instagram because I really like what he had to say. He says here that many recreational lifters do aerobic exercise in addition to strength training, either for health reasons or to help with fat loss. However, some research groups have found that performing aerobic exercise regularly while doing strength training workouts leads to smaller increases in muscle strength and size compared to just doing strength workouts alone. And there is no, and he goes on to say, there is no real clear answer for this. And there has been some studies that have replicated exactly what they're talking about, and then some that have shown no, that's not necessarily the case, and they don't know exactly why. And then he goes on to why do we think he goes on to why do we think this is, and so there's kind of he references a lot of the studies here and links back to them. So he kind of has a part 1 and a part 2, but both of these essentially come down to the fact that we're sending competing signals. And this is something that I, just observationally understood from programming for so long, is that, again, exercise is just a signal. We're giving our body a message, and we're saying, I want to have less body fat, I want to have more muscle, and I want to have more, cardiorespiratory capacity or VO2 max or whatever. And we're sending it all these signals. And so that's really the key of what exercise is doing. It's not about, like, for example, just burning more calories. It does help that, when you exercise, you are burning more calories. So if you're trying to maintain a caloric deficit, that's going to aid in that. But it's so much more complicated when you really get down to it, and they still haven't been able to figure out exactly how that works. But what we do know is we're sending a signal to the body to release, hormones and release these things that cause changes in the body. And so what the previous studies, kind of their hypothesis became, well, maybe they're competing. We're telling the body, we want you to put all your effort and energy into adapting aerobically, or strength. And when you put them both out, it's going to preferentially choose the aerobic capacity. So I was waiting for you to say something, Gigi.
I'm listening. I didn't read the article, so I'm just listening intently. Oh. I didn't do my homework. Sorry, Teach.
Yeah. So when he, one of the things they talk about is ATP and the signaling that happens, and then, the changes in mitochondria and, capillary density and all this stuff. And what I found intriguing about the article, which again, kind of jives with my own experience, was that his sort of proposed difference is, after looking at some of the research, was that endurance causes a much greater deficit in your central nervous system, right? So endurance training is much harder on the wiring in our bodies that sends the signals to the muscles to contract, right? So we have these nerves that go to the muscle and it splits up, and the more powerful that signal, the more muscle fibers we can recruit to do that activity. So if we're doing, if we're lifting and we're rested and we didn't do anything significant before that, we're going to be in our best position to use all those muscle fibers. And so this is going to help us with growth of the muscle, hypertrophy, and it's also going to help with speed and power because we're getting that maximal signal. Now, when people talk a lot about like overreaching or overtraining, one of the signs of that is that your central nervous system starts to downregulate. One of my favorite studies or examples is that what the Russians did for their athletes is they would always be required to do a test before training. And this is one of the secret things I use for my competitors, and I recommend for people who are training really hard, is you get one of those dynamometers, the grip testers, and you can get a digital one for 20 or $30 on Amazon that'll work fine. I'm sure there's more expensive, more complicated ones. and you just test someone's grip strength, which is a very central nervous system movement. So the more you can contract and peak that thing out, the better your central nervous system is firing. And then they also did a broad jump, right? Just on the flat ground, broad jump for distance, and then they measure that. And I think they also did a chest throw with the med ball. That might have been one I came up on my own, or it might have been one that I read about. But you have these tests, and what you're looking for is if those numbers, if they're down one day or something like that, it's not a big deal. But if we start to see a trend where people's grips, for example, are decreasing over a period of days, we know that they're under recovering. So the workload is too much. Maybe they're not getting enough sleep. Maybe they got sick. All these factors can play a role with decreasing performance. And then you can adapt their regimen to let them recover. So maybe give them less volume or just change the programming until they rebound. On the other side, what you'll see sometimes is their numbers will start going up. So they start jumping a little farther, or their grip starts going up, and it starts to increase, and we see a trend going up. And that means that they're peaking too soon. So if they have a meet or a deadline or some sort of competition coming up, we don't want them to peak, because after every peak, there's always a decrease. Just the way the body adapts. And so what you would then do if they started to see that trend go up, you would actually increase the volume and change the programming to make it a little harder on them, to kind of knock them back down in place, and then so that they can peak at the right time. And so that's kind of another example of how the central nervous system works. And what was interesting about this guy's hypothesis is saying, so what happens with aerobic stressors is the central nervous system is downregulated for a lot longer, for hours and hours after you've done that effort. And they're talking about kind of more the longer, aerobic capacity type stuff that you would see. So things in like the, 30 minutes, 40 minutes and stuff like that. And just the more, the more intense and long, the more downregulated the central nervous system is. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of runners and triathletes sometimes have a little bit of a spare tire, is because they're training in that really overtrained, kind of they're pushing themselves to that under recovery, overtraining state, because they're trying to get as much volume as they can before their next race. And that stress, one of the ways that stress manifests is through a little bit extra body fat. But yeah, and so what the previous studies all did, the ones that say that there's this interference effect, and the people who were trying to get strong and worked on their aerobic capacity first and then did lifting, they almost always really had no strength gains or very limited strength gains compared to people who just did strength gains. And even when they had a 2-hour break in between, they still saw this interference effect. And this person's hypothesis is, if we're not firing as many muscles because we did some aerobic work, we go in to do the lift, and now the lift meet, where our central nervous system isn't firing as strongly because it's been taxed so much and it's still recovering from the aerobic work, we're not going to recruit as many muscles. And if we're not going to recruit as many muscles, we're not going to be as strong that day, but also we're not going to get as strong a signal to get stronger, because we're not going to release the hormones and everything that we need, right? So, and he talks about the mTOR pathway and all that. So it's an interesting theory, but I think it does prove itself out in the field, right? And
well, I was going to say, we've all experienced this, right? Like if you go and do something super active and then go to try to lift heavy, you're fucking worn out. And you just like, to pull off a heavy lift, it takes everything you've got. You've got to be mentally focused. You've got to like breathe fucking properly. You need to have a good breakfast, like whatever. Everything's got to be there for you to get that max output, right? Everything has to be 100% lined up. Everything doesn't need to be 100% lined up to go for a run. Like you can be a little bit lightheaded. You can, that's a terrible example. Don't really.
No, but you could be having an off day, right? You can be having an off day and
skip breakfast and go for a run. And you can, have the wrong music and go for a run. Your breathing can be a bit off. You can still go for a run. Nothing's going to happen. But if something's off, you're not going to PR your back squat. You're not going to nail that heavy lift, because you need to recruit absolutely fucking everything in order to achieve that. And obviously, if you go and like crush a big cardio session before you attempt this big lift, you're just going to be worn out, right? And it's like, anecdotally, yeah, it makes sense, right? But to know that there's like some kind of science behind it too, just further backs it up, right?
Yeah, yeah. And so this is one of the studies that he references here, and this is from his Instagram, and he backs it all in this really, really fine print. But one of the things he talks about is peripheral fatigue versus central fatigue. And so peripheral fatigue they can measure by they take the muscle and they actually electrically stimulate it. And so it's completely independent of your central nervous system. And that means like, is the muscle fatigued, right? And versus is the nervous system fatigued? And they talked about how the peripheral force might actually be still there for these people who did aerobic work before, but it was actually the central fatigue that was meaning why they couldn't lift as many or recruit as many muscle fibers. And so that was a really interesting example. And it was usually, like it says, they compared people doing 4-kilometer versus 20 to 40 kilometer. I think it was stationary bike, and they were testing VO2 max and things like that. There was another one, the effect of 2 different concurrent training programs on strength and power gains in highly trained individuals. That was really interesting, where they talked about resistance training versus they were comparing cardiovascular training versus resistance training versus high intensity interval training, and they found that the high intensity interval training actually didn't negatively affect the strength training, right? So it improved the VO2 max and was more time efficient than cardiovascular training, and people still made strength gains, right? So again, this is why CrossFit works, so to speak. Can't see my. And then there was another one here. He references the physiological effects of concurrent strength training endurance training sequence, a systematic review and meta-analysis. And again, what they were finding was there was this has a lot of big words, fixed or random effect models per level of heterogeneity between studies, and further sensitivity analysis was carried out using inverse variance heterogeneity, and then the preceded endurance with the pooled mean change, and so.
So what does that mean,
Well, this was saying, it says, however, the training sequence had no impact on aerobic capacity with a pooled difference of this. Sequencing strength training prior to endurance in concurrent training appears to be beneficial for lower body strength adaptations, while the improved aerobic capacity is not affected by training order. So basically what it's saying specifically is putting the strength training prior to endurance appears to be beneficial for strength, while the improvement of aerobic capacity didn't matter, right? So when you're doing both, for example, like I said, if you did the aerobic capacity stuff first and then lift, it didn't affect, you still got aerobic capacity gains. You just have diminished strength gains. But if you put the strength first, you get strength gains, and again, you get the same amount of aerobic capacity gains if you do it after, right? Does this sound familiar? This is why we do this in the gym this way. We do short, high-intensity interval training, and we do it after a lift, right? Because now we get the benefit of the strength training, and we get the benefit of the cardiovascular training and the VO2 max and things like that. So like and like I said, in the field, in my own training, that's what I see is that people who do a ton of aerobic training, over time they don't make the same strength gains if they try to prioritize that versus doing the lifting first. And again, it's a safety thing too, but if we do the lifting first, we see both, we get the benefits of both training protocols versus one or the other.
So if you are going to do a 2 a day, what do you do? Like, and I'm not saying I'm saying if you're a normal human and you like to run, but you also know that you need to lift weights, and say the only time that you can run is in the morning, or you like to run in the morning, right? But then the only time you can lift is at lunch. Is that enough time? Like the study kind of talked about 2 hours. I would assume that if you're running at like 6 a.m. and then lifting at noon, that's probably enough time, right? Assuming that your nutrition is on point in between and you're getting enough sleep at night. Like, what do you think? Do you think that was?
I think there is it depends on how long you're running and how hard. Obviously the harder you push yourself on the run, the more you're going to be affected for the rest of the day. If you could do them on separate days, that's going to be better. But if you can't, if this is your regimen or whatever, and this is the only time you can train, it's still, again, you have to make sure your recovery's in, and you don't want to push yourself too hard on the run. I don't remember if this was the article, but I think it sometimes, has been measured out to 6 hours and beyond. Is just remember that the closer you get, the worse it's going to be, right? So doing a run and then immediate lifting is the worst thing you could do for making strength gains. And, if it's 8 or 10 hours, that's going to be better if you can do that. So like run in the morning, lift at night. But according to the research, you can get both, but you got to put the lifting first and the strength training first.
That's awesome. I think we got to wrap this up soon, but I just want to say one more thing. Like the neurological effect on lifting, I think, is often like really, really downplayed. But one of the things that when I was a coach that I used to discuss with clients is that they kind of go through 2 curves when it comes to lifting. And when they first start to lift weights, the very first curve that they're kind of achieving is this neurological curve. And it's not at the point where it's challenging where they're getting to like muscular failure yet. They're getting to neurological failure because your brain doesn't know how to move under pressure yet. And it's unfamiliar to like be under weights, and it's unfamiliar to like throw a barbell around, and being able to recruit all of your muscle fibers takes a lot of neurological strength that you need to train first. And that's kind of the first curve. And once you kind of get over that hump, then you're looking at really a lot of like physiological gains. But you've got to get over that neurological impact. And this is where like we talk about stress and like living well and all that kind of stuff. If you're coming into every gym session like super fucking stressed and you can't turn off your day and you can't just zone out to the music and you can't use your social time to get into that lift, you'll never hit that lift ever, because your brain is so distracted. So you have to be able to like use it as like a meditative effect almost, right? Know that you'll get the most out of that lift if you go in like kind of zen, right?
Yeah, yeah. And the more you train, the easier it is to recruit that. So the longer you've been training, this is actually what I believe is old man strength, right? So, a lot of the, powerlifting titles and things are held by people who are a little bit older. They're in their 30s and even 40s, because we're still growing and we're still figuring out our bodies as we go into our teens and 20s. And even though that might be like the physiological peak for a lot of other things, neurologically, we haven't learned how to fire all those muscles. One analogy I always teach people is it's like a game of tug of war, right? You have 2 teams. You have one team of, let's say you have one team of 5 people, and they're not talking to each other, and they're all sort of pulling all these different times or whatever, and they're not really coordinated. And then you have another team of, say, 3 people, but they're like, okay, ready, 1, 2, 3, and all 3 people pull at the same time. They're going to be stronger, even though there's less of them, because they're all working together in unison. And that's what the neurological adaptation is that we're getting all of our muscles. That's what speed and power is. But even on some of the slower strength stuff, if we can recruit more people to our team to all work together, we're going to see that strength gain. And it's also something to point out too, is that I tend to program a little bit more on the strength side. So we know that the lower rep ranges, 1s, 2s, up to about 5s is really trying to stimulate neurological adaptations. And then 5s to 12s or 15s is usually kind of a blend of sort of strength and hypertrophy, muscle growth. And then anything kind of in that 12 and up range, up to 20, even 30, could actually be more for hypertrophy. So, when you have your females, women are sometimes concerned about becoming too bulky, and you can say, look, this is not traditional bodybuilding where the goal is size. Size is the prize, right? It's really more on the strength side. We want to be as strong as possible, but also lean and fast. Right. So we want to be able, because that's also going to affect our performance in our daily lives when we're just doing fun things outside of the gym, but also all our body weight stuff. We only want, for every ounce of muscle that we have, we want to be able to use it to its maximum ability, which is neurological. I'm surprised you didn't mention my hat.
What? We already talked about your hat, didn't we?
I know, but you didn't say like, oh my God, this thing's ridiculous.
I thought I did. It's ridiculous. Maybe
Yeah. But yeah, and you know, I'm super happy that this whole bulky size thing is not nearly as much of a discussion as it used to be, right? I don't know if you've experienced that kind of working in the industry as well. You know, I think it's great that a lot of women especially understand that you know, that it's not how we train, but even then adding a little bit of muscle, that's great. It isn't going to make you bigger, you know, like physically larger.
God. Like, adding muscle is the thing that 90% of women need. Like, women don't have enough muscle mass. And the thing that they don't understand is, like, you want to lose weight. So estrogen holds on to fat. Estrogen directly translates into testosterone the second that you start lifting. You don't even need to be strong. You just need to lift, right? And it's like, if you want to lose weight, the best thing to do is to balance out your estrogen and testosterone levels. Like, and it happens like that, right? But it's so scary, and women have such high rates of like osteoporosis and like all kinds of bullshit. And it's like, man, just lift something, dude. Like, you'll be so much
off. and muscle burns calories at rest, you know. So even if you're training really hard all the time, you're only burning 10 to maybe 20% of your calories in fitness and physical activity. The 80% or more of your calories every day are burned just in your normal resting states. And this number is really, I don't know how much stock I put into it, but they say, you know, you'll burn 50 extra calories for every pound of muscle versus a pound of fat, right? And why this is important, you know, if someone were to lose 10 pounds of fat and add 10 pounds of muscle, that means that person needs to eat 500 calories more per day to maintain that where they're at, right? And so, I mean, 10 pounds sounds like a lot. You know, for a lot of women, it might be closer to, let's say if they lose 5 pounds of fat and gain 5 pounds of muscle, that's physically, you're going to be able to see that change because also remember that fat is 5 times the size. So if this finger here is a an ounce of muscle, this is 5 ounces of fat, right? So, you know, if you lose 5 pounds of fat and gain 5 pounds of muscle, that'll you'll change visibly. But then your scale won't have changed. But guess what? Now your body is burning 250 calories more every single day, you know, just by adding a little bit more weight, right? Or adding a little more muscle. And so that's the other benefit too. And that's the reason why we do lifting before our Metcons. Why we keep the Metcon short, because remember, the duration was really important. The longer the duration, the harder it was in the central nervous system, the harder it was to make strength gains. And so we want to make sure that we do that's why we keep the Metcon short on lifting days instead of doing a lift and then a 20-minute Metcon. It's always usually around that 10-minute range, or a lot of times less, or maybe a little bit more. But it's because of these adaptations that we want.
Love it. All right, we should wrap this up.
Cool. All right, everybody. Thanks again for tuning in. If you're listening in, you can catch this on YouTube and check out some of the graphics and stuff. I will link to the articles and things in the description. And that's it, guys. Thanks for tuning in. And I really appreciate it. You know, feel free to share this wherever you guys want. This isn't private information. Let's get it out to as many people as possible. Hopefully it helps them make change in their lives and in the world around them. Thrive on.